time. And that's how you process your day in that settings through a 24 cycle. Now, in that settings and travel, I just like to continue on because I think it's very important that there's no such thing as accidents. You just now understand that the brain is already set up through its construct, through its information, to its infrastructure that's already set up through its primer. Now, for you to modify these things as you go higher into the mind line and position animation that correlates to communication position, you get less confusion in location that's everything set up in your position of your sim and process in your simulator to your simulations. Process in angles gets in position lines of travel. Okay, and it's all modify how you see it through animation lines. Okay, so let's just get into basic lines of grounds and sentence sequence. Process of indications, all right? All right, so basically you're here. Okay, you're here, all right? You're not here until you bring yourself in, all right? So now you're bringing yourself in, all right? Bring yourself in, boom. If not, this is what happens. You're not even there until you bring yourself in. Okay, so you're not there until you bring anything in that settings. But to bring things in, you have to understand how to bring the grounds and communicate that setting. So everybody is already conversed in that position. The brain is already set up in its circuits. It's already set location to its memory that processes your mystical cortex, the design that you see in the position location of visionary lines that operates location setting, how you see that communicates to its position through its operation setting that gets you into proceeding through its conscious. How you identify that location is all through perspective. Okay, so it's very important you guys get a handle on this in set lines of travel. So you don't bring yourself in, you're not there in set positions. Okay, you're not there, just empty space. Okay, but see, the thing is, there's no empty space. There's no space, there's no time, there's no empty space, there's nothing there, nothing. Okay, which is clean slate, all right? Which is what? Just invisible. You live in invisible worlds, right? So you're just there, just zero gravity, just there, zero. So being invisible, coming into invisibility to invisible. Process in that of communication system puts all communication lines of balance and that position lines of communication. Okay, because you live in invisible worlds now. You always have been. Now you just have to understand how to convert the animation into direct locations to its real time. You, right? So that's you right now, clean slate. Now, you want to bring in empty space? There's empty space. All right, and when you bring in empty space, you can bring in anything in that position. Empty space, you want to bring yourself in. Okay, so you're bringing yourself in now. Okay, that's you in empty space. All right, now, it all depends where you go in a box triangulation system. Now, this is time replacements where you have to go on a course, a recourse, reset line, direct lines, course centers, a timeline centers, time edit, line screen depth, and a plus. That process indicates in the system how you basically understand how to bend space of time. Bending space of time is more time mass. That puts you in position lines of pi. So that's the space you are in position. Okay, so that's 10 minutes. 10 minutes on grounds. Okay. Equal setting as 10 minutes in frame. So that's 10 hours in space and convergence. Okay, 10 hours in space, 10 minutes on Earth, right? So when the 10 minutes is up and the 10 hours in sequence is set ready to go, everything around the system goes back to its animation world. It disappears. Because you didn't set a timeline. You just set a provision line. Timeline sequence, time locks centers through encryption, through binaries, and location setting in its convergence system, and time calculation to its time replacement. Everything around your system starts disappearing. Right? So it's very important you clock in your time. With your box frame, your triangulation frame. The bigger the box, the more time. Less the box, less time through mass. Now you're back to where you are. Where you've always been living is imagination world that you convert to through the real time. So you're there, but you're always there. You never left. But the process in that position location is setting time. It's very powerful stuff. And that's where we convert the system through line settings to your heart. Heart is the connection setting. The process indicates the system into harmonic lines of resonance. Location to its renaissance, location setting process into locations, into transcendence that puts you into your ascending. That gets in communication lines of balance, how you modify your systems all through travel. All right, so again, bigger the box, the more time you have with your friend, or wherever you are, or whatever you structure in design, right? The brain itself is the memory. that's already set everything up through construct of infrastructure through the animation of real time through your system. For you to understand that, that's an interact setting that processes you how to use that through interface. You now have to balance out what's coming to you into mystical cortex of your settings. Now, processing that is the theta. That's the imagination system that processes, calculates screen lines, adaptations of flux, that processes your indicator system, how you use that in triangulation lines of box of 333, or 444, or 555, or 666, or 777, or 888, or 999, or 101010, or 1111, or 121212. Right? That's 3 provision lines descending, 3 box frames, 3 box locations I need to travel. That indicates position of timelines, descending lines of communication setting. That locks the screen adaptation to its flux. That processes indication setting in that communication setting and travel. Okay, so it's very powerful how you come into this through its longitude and its latitude of its streaming, of its bandwidth. It's set lines of travel. Okay, more mass, more time with your friend. All right. All right, so it's really interesting. You come in this into 3 lines of flux. Okay, you have to have a platform. You have to have a ground. You have to have a pathogen. You have to have a collagen. You have to have an integration. You have to have a process line, all through set position of operation. All right. Now you can see it in all ways and forms. See it in that way. It's on the ceiling, right? So there's so many ways you can have a conversation in your system. It doesn't matter, but you have to set up position lines of grounds. A process of indications, crossing angles, directing lines of grounds. Okay, grounds, ceiling, right? Now, convert the system of walls and travel. Okay, now you got a door screen. Okay, open lines of signals, open lines of panel. Process of position lines of calculations. There's the door. And set lines of communication. Process that indication lines and settings. Process that position lines of travel. Comes through the door. Okay. All right, there's your friend, right? Now you come in, right? Talking to your friend because you brought everything all in, but you're seeing a vision that the brain's already set up in conversion through its intercepting, through its interface, right? Now you're connecting with each other through telepathy. Beautiful, well done, right? All right, so going to the next level, you always have to have a grounds. You have to bring it in because they're not indicating what's going on with that setting, right? So it's a process that you've already set this up. That comes into the memory that converts the system of its balance, of it readjusting the atmospheres of its intelligence, of its network. That gets you in your communication system, how you use that in interactions, all right? So if you don't bring in the grounds and you bring somebody in, they're not going to understand what's going on, right? They're going to be like this on the grounds in sequence, right? So bring in the grounds, okay? Bring in the box. Okay, bring in the panels, right? Bring in the ceiling and set lines of travel, okay? So I'm just showing you basic understandings here because there's no coincidence how everything that comes in setting lines of position, so everything disappears. Well, it disappeared because you forgot to bring it in, right? Knowing that it's already set up for you through construct, through infrastructure, through its connection, through its binary, through its algorithm, and that position and settings. Through its encryption, okay? So modifying that position lines of settings, okay? Sets lines of sequence and off to travel, okay? So that's you. You just bring it in yourself, right? And now basically, I'll show the lines of position in the memory line and that process lines. This is the box frame. That's what you're seeing through mystical cortex and settings line. This is your theta. So that's 3, 3, 3, 3. There's 3, 4 lines of box center, all right? So it travels in 3 directions, process of indication setting to calculate. So that's what you do with the 3s, okay? So that indicates time measure and scale. Override sequence lines of grounds and set lines of travel into the sim. The box that frames the travels indirect lines and position to your calculation screen location setting to your building. A structured design that's already set up. Sets windows and frames of travel, okay? Done by equation, all right? So now you convert your system, change the image. Now you're on top of the building. And that lines of screen lines adaptation to its flux. Process lines that indicate centers, all calculate ground centers and location system and travel. Okay? Travel is the point lines of graph. 3 centers of indicates setting of flux. Process lines of indicates online center and sequence of communication. Directing on ground centers and sequence lines of grounds into communication system and row graph screen location and settings of travel. So this outlines the grid of communication setting calculation. All right. So always, always, always have a triangulation box set up, right? So it's already set up for your system. Now it's coming to you through mystical cortex and a fast track location setting. In the convergence system, you have your tractions in set position to its crown. Okay, that's the crown, right? All right. So that's come into line position to your cells lines and position all levels being sustainable. Process lines of indicates 3 grounds, over lines of travel, 4 lines of measure, 5 lines of scale. Process indicates line centers, location grid, over line screen, adaptation of bridge. Directing ground centers line sequence in position location and setting through its frost bridge. Process lines of rainbow in position to its frost bridge. It indicates setting all through flux and set lines of percentage. On center, on sequence, on pi. Travels at point lines of graph in set position. Transhumanism, mutation in position and setting lines of travel. Point lines into transformation. Okay, through the crown. So as you walk through the crown line, it gets a higher direct line centers to the animation world that you process through in real time through the seconds, minutes, and hours in position at the same time, clocking centers lines of communication system. So what you guys are going is going direct and redirect in one center and one cycle of location. Okay? So it's all levels of yin and yang, how you process that through its indication, all through percentage. Okay? So from here to here, that's it. So this is the animation of space. This is the animation of grounds. Animation of space, animation of grounds. Travels and point lines, there it is, face recognition. Okay? So, remember I told you about the streaks are paved with gold and you never get old? Well, that's what it is. Golden realm, golden cycles, golden ratio, golden proportions, how you see that in travel. Direct lines of link that process your indication system of the calculation setting. So, location grid, starting with that setting, right? 3 centers of travel, all through indication. Okay, into the portal of Stargate. All right, so sets position, sets tractions, rainbow. Okay, frost bridge. Okay, now the set position of location, the actual angelics, is in the center operation setting of travel. It's in the center. That's the crown. Okay, that's the crown. That's your holographic city. Okay, processing that through energetic dome. Skyline grid, sky grids, sky lines, high centers, sky panels, process line position into Skynet and travel. Living in the skyline. Right? So that's going to convert the system when you guys get in position lines of 12 settings. But your platitude location setting is now in 8 lines of infinity. Now this process indicates the system how you see it travels. Into your projections, how you perceive, bringing things in through consciousness. That's already set up in its animation of its real design. That's inference structured in position to its construct of your blueprint, in your divine, in your divinity, in set position to its conception of its inception itself. Living the animation and the real time at the same time clocking. Okay? So the conversion of the rainbow and the frost bridge is 1. Okay? Which is yin and yang. Okay? So, dream world, real world. So, this is the portal, okay, to the real world. This is the portal, okay, to the dream world. Face recognition, 2 recognition of faces, right? So that's where it comes in setting when you spin the cycles, lines of screen adaptation of 8 lines of screen, process lines of 8, rotation lines of spin, spins the cycles and travel, correlations set calculated modified to internal and external force and a force records of time frame and set course centers converting system all through angles. Infinity 8. So the Infinity 8 rotates the cycles and travel of communication. Okay? So now the convergence system comes into the body conceptual setting of pixelation graphs. The process indicates setting all through box frame, location setting, convergence system all through travel. Okay, it puts that position lines of balance. So now you just have to understand how to balance out the animation worlds in that position. Humanity is in the cognito lines, and placements and compartments into its ecosystem in one lines of flux. Process lines alpha beta. Travels of point lines of graph indicates lines of high standard calculated screen lines. Operators and units and activators and position location of travel is now in high course centers, directing line, position, location, and visible chart ways into invisibility, into invincible, and travel point lines of graph. Set course centers, time sequence, and wavy panels and screen line adaptation. 3 centers of measure, scales of communication convergence. Now it gets very tricky how we do this, and this, and 4 centers of travel. Directing ground centers of operation lines 0, 1s over travel through pi. Process indicates lines, flux over lines, and 144 lines of scale. 3 centers line convergence system in position lines, operation lines settings, location to its stories of indication setting going through center. Process line position operation line sequence, crossing line angles, 4 centers of communication lines of travel. Road graph screens and set adaptation is the flux. Process indicates line centers and simulation grounds of communication system into its animation. Center ground centers of sequence, x 3000 over 1, x mother line rotation, x travels at point lines of 2, mothership over lines of 3 over set lines of circuit. Process lines of indication setting over line centers, location setting, and its communication setting to its convergence system, all through triangulation. Process of indication lines of grounds, pixelation, holographic line centers, road graph screens, adaptation of flux, fortitude, and ground centers in sequence lines of skyline grids and set lines of travel. Process of indication line ground centers, simulation ground centers of surface and travel communications. Okay, very complicated stuff, but a lot of fun. Circulation, rotation lines of grounds on signals and that position to its operation, surface, location to its setting. Sets grounds of sequence, patterns over lines, rotation lines of flux into galaxy lines of alignment and travel, planetary line screens, operation line sequence, platitude, location, setting, and surface. That indicates your system all through travel. Tubing lines of 1, process lines of 3 over 4 over 6 over 8 over 12 over 24, line set 9, position location is 0, 24. Operation line sequence and platitude location setting to simulation system all through track location. Done by equation. So it's very powerful stuff, how this is all set up in your settings and all that communicates to its system. Bringing everything into the brain convergence system that's already construct, the infrastructure of you that's already done through its set position. So you have to really understand how to bring in focus on the vision. The vast, the volume, the velocity, the vacuum, the voice, position lines of centers, the vacuum, the voice, the operation, the intelligence of communication of existing. The voice itself. The platitudes all course centers of time measure and line centers that communicates to ground centers and pixelation grounds. Operation lines, pixelation on line ground centers in sequence and platitude location setting and wall sync lines and grounds and 45 line centers of flux over screen and direction. Platitude line connection setting and convergence. Triangulation over lines and platitude is over screen location. Operation line sequence, patterns lines, 3 centers of travel, and course centers of communication. Okay? All right, so that's done through the equation, all through set calculations of conception. All right? All right, so it's very complicated what I'm doing, but you have to process understanding. All right, so it's very important that you basically understand what's going on with your memory now, because your memory is dissipating into the mind alteration lines, just into the animation worlds and the conception of the real world at the same time scale. The percentage is no longer 100,000 line. It's triple line centers of 300,000 in humanity into locking screen adaptations and all course time frame locations and travels that comes into incognito. Directing ground centers and process line direct line connection setting, the convergence system and set lines of travel now. The process of indication line calculates the green line's adaptation to its animation to its real-time frequency line to its fractals, process indication lines of flux, process lines computer line coding. Umbrellas over line is 3 centers of travel into the atmosphere's lines of change. Directing ground centers into the mind alteration lines, directing lines into systematic line course centers and travel communicates positions, operation lines of platforms and crop circles, and direct lines of 12 lines of set position of panel. Process line and inline centers of 3 centers of travel, 4 centers of scale, 5, 6 lines of measure, 7 lines of course centers, sky grids, sky lines, sky panels, process line, direct lines, and ground center line communications, operation lines of pi, generation line, course centers, convergence system, all through traction, all through setting. Okay? So their convergence system is now in 1 million lines per frame per second per mile. Congratulations, team operators and activators. Now that communicates your conscious where you left off and locates lines into your longitude, your latitudes, your connection to your streamings, and locations to your process lines, your CPU and line centers. The process lines of indication setting, your animation line grounds, and your animation line core centers and converts the system all through settings, your animation line, position of visionary cortex, and direct lines of mystical cortex, matrix cortex, correlation to cerebellum into the fluid line of the axis locates the setting and convergence lines of travel. All inset lines of communication. Fortitude, streamlines of lines of high centers that communicates in position of mapping lines of pi, outline centers, direct lines of molecules of 3 centers of travel, stepping procedures, and direct lines of grounds. Okay, process lines of angles indicates height lines of flush, indicate lines of transit, process lines of indicates in setting over lines of setting, and location of square roots over screen line adaptation of flux, indicate ground centers into panels of screen adaptation of travel. Okay. All right, so processes indicate line centers. That indicates 4 centers of bedding. Set position of 3 centers of bedding, crossing angles of flux line of 4 centers of travel of communication. Converting sending lines of high operations. Very high core centers of communication lines of codes and navigation. Core centers of calculation lines, circulation lines, navigation line and routers, line signals, location setting, and position operation lines of sequence, and position lines to its animation. Process indicates line centers to real time, animation into real-time sequence, into time frame and track location. Setting core centers, embedding over flux, cross wheels, process line indications over lines of platforms over E factors over screen. Directing ground centers, earth line rotation, travels at point line communication inside line centers, earth itself, space itself, and void itself. Fortitude lines of 12 line centers of rotation, process lines nothing to the emptiness of void itself, and process lines into vast. That communicates lines of 4 black holes, directing ground centers of sequence in the earth line rotation to its pixelation lines to its full animation system is set in lines of travel. Your animation worlds. Committing to transparent, translucent, thermal, and X-ray. Process indicates setting how you come into the convergent system. The light metaphors that comes in the coloration lines of light. That communicates setting, position to its system. All right? But welcome to the animation world. Okay? All right, so once your Earth rotates the cycles, it retracts the convergent system to infinite line centers at time-locked centers. The clocking line center location goes through 0 gravity. Processing that indicates the setting puts all communicates in its positions all through its operation line setting. Animation over flux into square roots. Animation lines or location lines of grids. Rainbows. Setting travels at point lines, circulation over 1, circulation over 2, circulation over 4, 6 lines of measure, dimensional, and solar cell, and travel in the solar system and rotates lines of grounds and set lines of sequence. Okay? All right. So as we convert the system, we get a true understanding how we go into the adaptation setting to travel. Okay? So if you do not set the grounds through conversation in that position, they fall flat. So it's not about forgetting. It's muscle memory, which you already know through a mapping system that's already coordinated through the brain. The brain is just the balance. It's the readjusting to the atmospheres of its intelligence, of its networking system. Okay, that's the brain. Converting line position takes out the mind line centers to no memory, process lines of indications into line core centers, and converts the system all through superobvious consciousness, overriding the central core centers of time line centers that kicks the high drive set lines of communication position to its operation line sequence that gets in positional case to its operation lines of center. Sending operation line travels, puts all line centers to direct lines that communicates to its position all through measure and scale and balance of indication lines of metrics, correlation lines of traction, social media, core centers, convergent system, all through setting, in process calculation lines of social network setting, location to its travels, in process line core centers, convergent position location to its system, in travels in position lines of setting, in triangulation lines of flux. Operation line sequence, process and position to its mapping system. All through setting, all through operation. Okay? Okay, ground shift lines anomalies, 4 centers of travel, 5 centers of scale. Okay, so that's a mapping system, a time frame. And travel, okay? So it converts the angles all through flux through all core centers of time line. So in that lines, you look inside the rotation to its visional cortex that's already set up through its memory and set lines of travel, okay? Visionary line here, visionary line here, 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 here. It's already in chronological order, mapping sequence, mapping pi, correlation lines and animation into position lines to its real time, right? So that's all picked out. So in that lines, it's all inline screen adaptation. Process indication system is your body in conception. All right, knowing exactly what's coming into the vision. This one, this one, this one, this one, this one's coming in, this one's coming in, this one's coming in. A flooding system of your intel is going to go through high line screen adaptation of flux now, all through travel, right? So you have to integrate the lines that are now lines of screen adaptation with process lines because you're in 1 million scales per line, per calculation, per square root now that triangulates position lines, position of point graphs in the core centers and communicates the system all through settings to your symbiotes. That indicates position of your flux line, core centers and communication lines of travel that change the face facade locations measured in the scales to the time scale. Setting operation line centers sets all communication system and all through travel. Now, in that line direct location setting. So if you forget something in the image in that position that was processing, that's going to put you in an overdrive, which will not be able to handle, right? So, for example, vision comes to you, right? I'll make it simple for you, how this all works. There's no such thing as accidents. It's just you to understand the conception, what the brain's already set up through its math, its construct that's already done through its equation. So in that position, right? I see the vision come to me. I see myself holding the watch, right? But I forgot to bring in the chair. I forgot to bring in the chair. I didn't bring in the full construct of its muscle memory that's already done through the brain. So if I don't bring it in, I'll fall off the chair. Even though the chair is there, it doesn't matter. If I get in a panel operation lines of screens in that position and I don't realize I'm leaning up against a wall and that vision comes to me and I forgot to bring in the wall, I'm going to fall down. Okay? That's solid matter. Okay? In that position. So you're here to adapt what's already set up for you in muscle memory. Okay? So it's very important that you pay attention to that because there's no coincidence when you have an accident on any level in that position locations. You bring in something so beautiful, but you forgot to bring in the initial point. That process and brings everything all together, which is your primer. The primer is the center of you. It's you. Bringing you in the animation to the real time. You don't bring in a primer, there's no structure. How this operates is all through your polarities, guys. Okay, very powerful stuff. 4 centers of communication setting to travel, right? Setting screens 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, point lines of 0. Okay, that's a primer. All right? This is the vision that's coming to you through traction. All right, now all zeros are linking together through schematics over lines. Now this is where it gets higher levels of set position when you reach high line communication setting that operates your set location to a system. Okay, so that's what the brain is converting to your settings, bringing that in settings. Process indicates the setting to the simulation, right? So these are all the lines of mystical cortex that's already set lines of travel that you've already gone through the 24 cycles of your film strip of your slide projector. That's already set in provision. All right, so as you come in that position locations, you're walking into the simulation lines of grounds, okay, in real time. 3 centers of angles, 4 lines of flux and travel communications, right? Film strip. Everything's a film strip. Everything's a film strip. Everything's a film strip. Everything's a slide projector, okay? And it's all through box window frames of travel, okay? All right, so that's a lot of set position of schematics over lines, direct lines to primer. Come in that position lines of travel through a clocking system and track location system. And remember, if you don't bring in a clocking system, you limit your time frame. And the box frame is the time frame itself. The time replace the system of time editing in track location, bending space into time replacement. Remember I told you that lines of screen adaptation system. So the more box frame you have, the more time measure comes in scale through a conversation setting, an ongoing conversation that you have time mass with that friend. So 3 minutes on lines of Earth, okay, puts 3 hours in space, right? But with you guys, you're triple lines of your value now in your mass and your volume. So you guys are starting up at 0 gravity. That equals lines of grounds, online sequence on communication setting, and visibility lines into 1 million seconds per frame. That's the operatives, units, and the activator locations. You're in 1 million set lines of travel. That's just on the grounds. So processing that indicate lines of ground centers, the 1 line centers position time sequence lines of 1 line centers, 1 set lines of travel, direct lines of ground centers, 0, 1 operation lines of sequence location set to its position location. Process indicates how you see it through flux. Set at 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, set lines of 3 centers, set travels, and position lines of pyramid activation line of grounds. Operation line embedding, set course centers. Okay, so That's very fast and set lines of travel, guys, to pixelation ground. Okay? Into a wall sequence lines of travel. In a platform is set position of ceiling line of travel. And of course, sends and communications lines, high position lines of travel. So that indicates line screen adaptations that you process your system through light speed. Okay? So that 0 equals lines into 1 million seconds per second. Okay, now you have to process the visionary cortex that comes in a whale line into frame centers, like a clothesline. Your data sheets comes in process communications and direction, right? And your body's here, coming into all line centers, the mystical cortex of design line. Process lines of 1, 2, and 3 lines of flux, okay? So that's 1 million centers of portals and stargates in screen, adaptation of 3 centers. Set position of 1 center, 1 travel, 1 direction, 1 ground, line course centers, dimensional solar sail, directing line ground center, course centers, convergent system, all through position of process line direct location in the brain. There's the brain. So the brain sets up lines of travel, memory cords, correlation setting, convergent system, multi setting, metric meters, scaled line, direct lines of grounds, online location setting, convergent system line, direct location setting, convergent system, all through attractions, directing line, set line, position, operation, line, set location, symbiotes, line course centers, directing line course centers, sentient line course center, convergent system, brain convergence line connections, direction, time frame, process lines, melting law, line and rotation lines, and set lines of sequence. That equation. Boom. Okay. So it's very powerful how this is all set up in your positions to your animations and your real-time and set lines of sync. Okay, so that converts the system. And once it reaches the 12 centers, there's going to be 4 black holes in set position through an operation. Okay? Now, that indicates the triangulation here and triangulation here. Process that indication. So all that is going to go in that in the center, spinning through cycles of grounds, set position of 2 panels into some location of same lines. You're going to be the center operation in the directions, everything around you, and that position is going to go into the void itself. Okay, it's going to disappear, but before it disappears, it's got to go into its void of empty space. So it can come into its no memory of all axis of memory. Okay, so it starts with the grounds, works around the system, triangulation of box. Okay. And then it just closes in that position. So you disappear in the space itself through light, shades, and shadows. Okay? Now that converts the system all through setting. Now you're just devoid of empty space, which is no mind of anything of image, no mind of anything through animation, no imagination lines of time and frame through calculations of clocking. That process, that indicates lines of grounds. Now, through activation line ground centers and sequence lines communication setting, you automatically come into your solar graph screens, which is white grounds, and set lines of sequence. Okay, and they come into position lines of settings to its scale of communication to its rainbow bridge. Sets travels of point lines of graph, indicate lines of securities, process lines position, rainbow bridge. Process line course centers, and directing ground centers and position location to its frost bridge. Setting travels of point lines of graph, the indicate lines activates line screen adaptation system, crosses all levels of the stream, and set position into the animation world. Okay? So, it's really interesting how you look at that through equation, how this is all set up in provision. And if you look really close, you can actually see the mode controls. That's the mode control. Mode control settings, process indicates the setting, construction lines, navigations to its console, and 5 sequence and 2 panels of operation. Okay? The console. All right, so that converts the system lines to calculation screen locations. Now, once that indicates the position of its navigation of its console, it has a direct line link that processes the location of its body that comes into its own navigation system into the simulation grounds, in position of powers, into the animation world, to the real conceptual location setting, to the body, position, its operation. 3 centers of grounds, in set position, and set lines of 3 grounds in sequence in set position. Okay, set lines, there's in travel. Okay, your teleportation unit, all through operation. Okay, so that converts the setting to skyline grid, process lines indicates the setting laser, process lines and online center, and sequence lines that set position of its operation. Okay? So I think it's incredible how we come into the animation worlds, how we process that is all lines and high centers. And that position location system is how it converts a system into the actual invisible worlds of animation. Okay, of inside and out. That's it, done. So your characteristics, your panels, your operation, your navigations, and that lines and screen adaptation and flux, process everything of indication settings, and that positions traveling through the consoles of communication. Okay. All right. So I want to make it very well clear of what goes on when you guys don't bring in that position of its vision that's already in construct, that's already designed in your system, that's in your blueprint through your connection setting. In that convergence system, you guys are going to be able to much process your faster lines, standard acceleration, your mocks, interstellar mode, hyperdrive. But that position location, the more you come into the mining conception of inception itself, you come into the kick drive, central drive, to the high drive that gets you in position, your energetic force line at screen adaptations of flux over flush. So it indicates lines of dimensional stories that you go through is set centers of 4, set lines of sequence. But each one has a box time frame and a film strip of a slide projector. Okay? Center course centers, offline centers, and it communicates to its position, to its structure of its settings, to its operation setting and travel. 4 indicates lines and direct lines of link. Okay, platted through locations in structure of design line. Okay, so it converts this over travel in direct lines of link. Okay, so there's so many ways how your video film strip is already set up in its position to its balance that crosses all angles, how we use that in a 42 location setting through a box of triangulation. Process that indicates line centers gets in that position to its operation sequence. Panel operation lines, pixelation graphs, holographic line screen adaptation setting, and your pyramids and astral projections of travel. Okay? That's a lot of indication setting to a film strip, to a video script. So that video script is process lines of timeline, frame line. So that indicates position of the body lines. It's in one structure line screen, adaptation to its setting, process of indicates setting, going to sleep. Sleep mode, retract, reposition, reset lines, course centers, reconvert the system in recursion, directing ground centers and line course centers in position to its operation, directing in the film strip, going up the time frame, set in sequence lines, a panel. Okay? So every time you go through a time frame line course centers, you go through another time measure that scales communication setting. So when the oversoul is ready to come in that position, there's the oversoul. It takes you out of the time frame locking location of story frame. So you don't get confused and locked into another dimension of another space of time, into high frequency and space line setting. Okay? So that's what goes on every time you go through sleep and that position and settings through naps, through its equation. Okay? So there you go. It's already set up. So the more you understand the structure, the more you understand your aligned position at the center, the more you understand the primer, that you are the center operation of your system, the more you convert your system into the animation of real time, everything starts making more sense of why you're doing this in the first place. That's already done through its equation. But you have to process everything into more lines, into more detail now. So processing that, you get more clarity, more focus, you're more accelerated to the line centers, you're colonizing your systems now into your information bits. They're getting a better understanding of you, you're getting a better understanding of them, in force of recognition, of time recognition, of pattern recognition, of colorations of light metaphors that put you in position of balance of indications, all through tractions, all through locations, all through setting. Okay? So in that position, it time frames its set line course centers in position of its operation lines of sequence that puts position of your platforms in that position lines of travel. So that process your system, how to use that through its equations, guys. Okay? So it's very important that if you bring it in a box, okay, and you get 3 centers of travel and directions, let's say you bring that in, right? But you forgot to bring this in, that one line. You forgot to bring this, you didn't complete the drawing, right? So that's going to override the sequence, and everything around your system is going to go back in position and settings to its void. And when it goes through its void, it goes back to its invisible chart wave. So one technical system changes another technical system location in your settings that phrases out in that position of set lines of communication all levels its high travels of its confusion. Okay? And it wipes out the screen, and that position lines of travel, directing ground centers, lines of sequence, that platted to location setting, all through its operation system, all through tractions, all through locations, in that positions, and the high centers in that rotations into its empty space, which is just the void itself. Okay? So, recognizing these things, it's all through memory, right? That's all it is through indications. So being very specific how you bring things in. It's not about forgetting, it's just muscle memory, what you already know through its memory. So you guys are at that level now. Especially you're processing 1 million seconds per frame. 1 million seconds per frame. Okay, that's fast. So you guys have to understand how to put that in all that communications position has a flowing intel that process location that comes in all calculate and modify, which is all of the base foundation line core centers in the position location setting that gets you into communication planetary solar systems of Jupiter, your information panel that gets you in your indications how to use it through a time reactor to a heart reactor that gets you in position location to its convergence so you can understand how to use your sonar interference, your echo line screens, your adaptation of flux, your process lines of angles on communication setting through the animation of real-time interaction that gets in all lines in position to its convergence system all through setting. Okay? So that's what happens in that position. So everything disappears. All right? So what that means, if I'm holding an apple and I'm supposed to bring in an orange, right? This indicated location with anther. So all of a sudden, the connection to the apple basically is somewhere else. It's not there because you forgot to bring in the actual original design that you already brought in through your memory that the brain is already set up through its conversion of its polarity of space and time through the animation and real time at the same time of clocking of time itself. So it's very powerful, you guys, to indicate that. There's no mistakes. Only decisions and choices you make. That process everything that you do already, what you've already done through its equation. Okay? So it won't be in your hand. It will be somewhere else. Until you actually bring the real design, which is the actual orange that you're supposed to bring in through its mystical cortex, through its visual cortex, through its imagination, into you in real time. Okay? So that's how it operates in the animation in real time at the same time at the same clocking of real time. Okay? So that's going to help you a little bit more guidance how this all works in set positions. So we'll get more into that lines of settings. Okay? So welcome to the animation worlds of infinity of the crown. Okay? Set lines of travel. So we'll be in the cloud convergence system in the Coliseum, level CA. Level CA. See you in 5.